Welcome everyone to this FLFE webinar. It's so great to see your names and where you're from in the chat. It's really exciting from Tennessee to Scotland to South Africa to Ontario, all over. Today we're giving a world consciousness update, going over the FLFE plant research with Dr. Gary Schwartz, and answering your questions about the research and about the FLFE service. I'm Jeffrey Stegman.
And I'm Clayton Stedman.
And I'm Gary Schwartz.
Great to have you with us, Gary. Dr. Gary Schwartz is joining us again this week for this webinar. We did that as well in the last webinar. For those of you that aren't familiar with Gary and his work, I'll go through the bio, and I just don't think there's a brief bio for you, Gary. It's your life work is so amazing. So Gary E. Schwartz, PhD, professor of psychology, medicine, neurology, psychiatry, and surgery at the University of Arizona, and director of its Laboratory for Advances in Consciousness and Health. Gary received his PhD from Harvard in 1971, was an assistant professor at Harvard through 76, and then served as a tenured professor of psychology and psychiatry at Yale University, director of Yale Psychophysiology Center and co-director of the Yale Behavioral Medicine Clinic before moving to the University of Arizona. Gary has published more than 500 scientific papers. It's amazing knowing the work that goes into each one of those papers, including 6 papers in the journal Science, has co-edited 14 academic books, and is author of Extraordinary Claims Require Extraordinary Evidence, which we're going to talk a little bit about that today. The Case for Truth, Greater Reality of Living, Super Synchronicity, which if you haven't seen our podcast around synchronicities, we talk about that book, Atheists in Heaven, Sacred Promise, and the Energy Healing Experiments. God, the GOD Experiments, Truth About Medium, Afterlife Experiments in the Living Energy Universe, which has excitedly kind of come into our hands, that was an early book of yours, Gary, and it's has some really interesting theories that might be helpful with FLFE in the future. And there's so much more. I'll just say that your current research integrates mind, body, medicine, energy medicine, and spiritual medicine. And your current research focuses on applications of innovative technologies for communicating with people who have physically died. That's the soul phone, and advancing human consciousness and well-being. So Gary has joined us as a member of the FLFE research team, along with research director Lewis Humphrey and Paula Bellwood, Maria Colamy, and myself and Clayton.
That is a mouthful. Or a life full, perhaps is better to say it that way. So you can let us know where you're from in the chat. It's great to see some familiar faces, or familiar names anyway. We have more than 70 countries represented on the FLFE service. It varies from time to time. And please put your questions and comments for us in the Q&A. We have Maria and Aditi from our FLFE team, and they'll be responding in the chat as much as they can with this number of people.
Yeah, it's good to have you all with us. Community is growing. We have over 700 people on the call today. I think that's a record for a webinar, and almost 1,000 signed up. So after we bring you up to speed with the World Consciousness Update, and with Gary's help, the FLFE plant research, we'd love to talk with you. So please, join us for the Q&A, and raise your hand virtually. We'll go over that when we get to that point.
So as a reminder, we did create a 700 LOC field during this FLFE community gathering today. And it'll be on here. Well, it's on here now, and it's on when you listen to it later. Pay attention to your hydration, and you may want to look at some magnesium and EFAs taken together a little later on today if you feel yourself a bit ungrounded. And we do have a section of our website called Consciousness Nutrition along those lines. You can visit that on the website under Tools, Supplements for Consciousness Support. So we're going to go through some world LOC numbers, and we're going to save the conversation for that for the Q&A. So we've calibrated the world overall, and we've calibrated the US. And then we've calibrated a couple of special days or significant events to give you a contrast of what that might mean on that day. So if we go back to last fall, 8/21, that's August 2021, world was at 220. US was at 350. That these are all out of measured on the Hawkins map of consciousness. So that's a scale from 1 to 1,000 in the human realm. I'll just let you look that up online, and you can learn more about the Hawkins map. It is logarithmic, so 1 point, for example, 221 is 10 times more powerful than 220. So even 1 point is significant, as it's a exponentially or logarithmically larger number. So September 2021, the world was at 220, US was at 360. In October, world's at 225, US was 365. November, the world was at 225, the world was at 365. And we'll have this on our website a little bit later. We'll update these numbers. In December of 2021, world was at 230. USA was at 370. January 2022, and we've only got about 6 more months to go here. The world was at 225 and USA was at 360. So February 24, 25, 26, the conflict in Ukraine occurred, and the world went to 170. So on the Hawkins map, integrity is at 200. The USA, or courage, is at 200. The USA went to 180. And in March, the world went from 170 to 180, and USA went to 210. By the way, on the 24th, 25th, and 26th, the world went to 100 those 3 days. So 100 on the Hawkins map of consciousness is fear. 150 is anger. The US went to 150 that day. I'm not sure what other countries in the world went to. I wouldn't doubt similar. We didn't check Ukraine on those days, but if I recall, we didn't publish it here, but if I recall, Ukraine went to like 50 those 3 days, which is in the realm of despair. So March 2022, world was at 180, USA was at 210. April 2022, world went back down to 158, US was at 211. May 2022, the world went up to 162, and the USA is at 214. In June, world was at 174, US was at 215. Dates of note in July the 1st, which is Canada Day. Canada went to 500 that day. And on July the 4th, the USA went to 500 that day. So that demonstrates the power of celebration and love for your country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good to see in the last 3 months, even though they're sort of small changes, an increase is happening. And we'd be happy to talk with you, our community, more about this in the Q&A. does seem to be a challenge and an opportunity at this time to stay informed about the world and stay positive and loving. So we can get into that more if you like, if you wish. So supporting the FLFE mission is the FLFE research team. So I thought I'd just talk about that just a little bit before we get into the plant research. So primarily at this point, the research that we're doing is into the effects and the benefits of the FLFE high consciousness field. And, you know, in the future, we'll expand into other areas and finding lots of exciting new things to look at. And it comes from you, the FLFE community. So you talk to us in these webinars, through emails, phone calls to the office, your testimonials that you give, and the Facebook private group. And your experience and your, you know, what you're noticing has at many times been the start of the research project, as Gary will show us today. So we really value your input. So, and it's partly why we have the office open in so many hours to take care of you and your journey of consciousness, but to talk about what your experience is like. So this FLFE research is what's you could call frontier research, meaning that it's on the leading edge of mainstream science. And frontier research often, you know, even though it's creating evidence for effects and benefits of, you know, say some energetic medicine, in this case, FLFE, it often is ahead of a fully developed theory or explanation about why or how exactly everything's occurring. So in the spirit and practice of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which Gary has brought to us. We had some version of that before him, but with his help, we've developed a gold standard of research with a high level of rigor that we'll talk about shortly. And if you want to, on the evidence page, you can see a history of our research, including exploratory experiments with ions, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, activating a high consciousness field in a Faraday cage with random number generators. We also had ions brainwave measurements showing increase in alpha brain waves and cognitive ability in an FLFE environment. Very small sample preliminary studies. We also did some EMF mitigation studies with an early survey and later using GDV cameras. And then, as we talked about in the last webinar, the customer experience survey. So that there's a video of that presentation there in case you missed it. And then we've got planned and in-process research, including a survey study of EMF sensitives, about the effects of the FLFE environment, you know, the EMF mitigation, and a focus study of relationships and families in the FLFE environment. I'm excited for that one, and more that Gary will share.
No lack of research projects for the research team.
That's for sure.
So with Gary's help today, we'll bring together 2 early preliminary plant studies with 2 new, more controlled studies with more data points. It's really exciting to see the plant studies come together because of the placebo effect. We can't tell plants how to behave or bias them in any way. So at least no way that I'm aware of. The seeds for the research came from you, the community, as Jeff said, in your testimonials, emails, and posts about plants. We have, I think, over 9,000 people now in our Facebook community. And whenever somebody shares a picture of a plant, there seems to be a barrage of plant pictures, and it's really quite beautiful. So with observation of plants, we can show, we believe we can show the beneficial effects of the high consciousness field in the FLFE environment. And yeah.
And synchronistic, Gary, to say the least. We'll have talking about synchronicities, that you joined the research team with your plant experience, which we'll hear about today. Deep roots, deeply rooted plant experience, I'd say.
Deep roots.
Oh my God, it's starting.
Well, you had the seeds of the research, with our plant research.
I'm going to try to
really,
stem the tide of the
Yes,
synchronicity. Stem the tide. You got it. Okay.
This
well, and it's
conversation
just
the conversation will continue to flower throughout the.
Well, it's been really fun as well, Gary, seeing your passion for the data analysis, really, of the results, and your openness to follow the results wherever they go. So thank you for mentoring all of us and the research team.
It's my privilege.
And we'll pass it over to you.
All right, so I'm supposed to screen share. And let me make sure that I set this up properly.
Looks good.
Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we've titled this FLFE and Plant Vitality Research, Phase 1 and Phase 2 experiments. And part of the reason for sharing this work is not only to help us better understand the justification for all of us being involved with FLFE in one way or another, but also because thinking about these findings and their implications does help support the evolution of human consciousness in general for the best and highest good. And I'm hoping that some of that will come through as we look deeply into these data. So here we go. This is dedicated to someone who was very supportive and very part of the FLFE community, Miles Stegman, who passed away unexpectedly in 2022. And the following comments were taken from his obituary, and it's a privilege to be able to celebrate and honor his who he was and is, and his role in the work. Miles was a lover of nature and animals all his life. He was a forever student of horticulture and loved to research, propagate, and grow new plants. Miles had an incredible ear and an impeccable taste in music. He played guitar and was exploratory and experimental in music listening and creation. And I happen to have a background in music and also played guitar, so I had this connection with Miles. Miles had many loving friends who would often refer to him as a gentle giant or baby Smiles. Miles' spirit will live on through all the people who adored him, including his colleagues in the FLFE research team, as well as through the plants and animals of this earth. And we will return to him in a bit. So here's an overview of this presentation. It is comprehensive, as I think you can sense from listening to Clayton and Jeff. They really love numbers and they really like to be able to quantify things. And so it's in that spirit that we will share all of this data, but try to do so in a way that's relatively clear. So first of all, we're going to talk about a brief introduction to the gold standard of research, FLFE's acceptance and extensions of that. Then we'll talk about a brief background on plant research, just so we're sort of all on the same page about what's been done in the past. We'll do that relatively quickly. Then we'll move to customer reports regarding FLFE and plant vitality, the kinds of examples that you provide FLFE with that become the inspiration for us to then determine to what extent are these general, are they valid, and so on. Then in part 4, we're going to look at 2 phase 1 small sample FLFE plant experiments. We'll explain what phase 1 and phase 2 are momentarily. Then 2 phase 2 follow-up FLFE plant experiments. And then finally, a brief summary and a look at some of the future FLFE plant research. So here we go. Part 1, the FLFE gold standard of research. Professor William James from Harvard University, he had a concept of what he called radical empiricism. And this notion of radical empiricism was the spirit of looking and following any kind of hypothesis that could potentially be explored and better understood through science. And that was part of following the data wherever it leads and being prepared for surprises. And as Jeff and Clinton say, we're constantly surprised, particularly doing this kind of frontier research. Now, the FLFE gold standard of research was derived from and adapted from a paradigm that's used in NIH in the health area, typically in clinical trials in medicine, but you can apply it to virtually anything. So I'll briefly go through this. Phase 1 research is where you do exploratory research, typically small scale, addressing the question, does carefully collected user evidence suggest that a given phenomena or service or treatment works? If positive findings are obtained, then you move on to phase 2 research, which is confirmatory and parametric research, typically also small scale, addressing the question, do laboratory and controlled experiments replicate the phase 1 experiments and also verify safety? Now, if positive findings are obtained in phase 2 research, then we move on to phase 3 research, multi-centered research, typically large scale, addressing the question, do controlled, multi-center, multi-blinded, randomized controlled trials replicate the phase 2 experiments in terms of efficacy and safety? Now, by the way, these kinds of experiments are large scale. They often take multiple years. They are very expensive and not typically performed by businesses unless they're very large scale businesses. And finally, if positive findings are obtained in phase 3 research, then sometimes phase 4 research is conducted, which is real life validation research. Again, typically large scale, addressing the question, are the positive findings obtained in phase 3 research replicated in large scale usage in real life? So we're going to be looking at some of the beginning phase 1 exploratory research, which then led to the initiation of our beginning phase 2 research. So we'll move on now to part 2, brief background on plant research. Now, there are various factors that influence seed germination and plant vitality. And if you're going to do controlled research in this area, you have to be aware of all of these and ideally control for them or at least quantify them. And that includes factors such as light, air temperature, air humidity, water, factors in the soil, including nutrients in the soil, the genetics, of course, of the seeds themselves. And then I've got these 3 down here that are asterisk, which is the effect of sounds literally on plant, including music, electrical grounding of the plants connected to the earth, and finally, human consciousness and intention, which of course includes prayer. And there are various books that speak to this history of the research in these areas that I'm going to speak to. First is a book that I wrote, published in 1999, called Living Energy Universe, which provides a substantial energy systems, quantum field integration of the kinds of work that lead to predictions in this area. I did a lot of research and published some of this in a book called The Energy Healing Experiments. And a lot of this research is also included in Lynn McTaggart's book, The Intention Experiment, of which you'll see some of the work that she and I did collaboratively. So let's first of all briefly talk about effects of electrical grounding on humans, animals, and plants. This book work is described, the initial work is described in a book called Earthing by Clinton Ober, along with a physician, cardiologist, Stephen Sinatra, and a professional writer, Martin Zuckerman. And you can see this, a documentary was subsequently produced called The Earth Movie, Remarkable Science of Grounding. And I use this picture partly because they have yellow flowers and green, and you've got to see a person standing on the earth. You see, because until very, very recently in animal and human evolution, humans were almost, all animals, all creatures were in direct electrical contact with the earth. Even birds that were flying, they weren't flying 24/7. They would be either on the earth or landing on trees and bushes and so on, which in turn are connected to the earth. And it turns out it's possible to do very easy controlled research in this area. And I didn't, of course, know if the earthing claims were correct or not. So I got involved with some very fundamental experiments. And these are some of my favorite. We did series of sunflower experiments. So we'd have, for example, 4 sunflowers cut the same age. They're all in vases. They're connected to cables, which connect into a wall plug. And these wires are connected to what's called earth ground, that part of the round part of a 3-pronged plug, which is a wire that then actually by code connects to a pipe, which goes into the ground. And if you looked at the 2 wires and plugs, and they're each connected to 2 of these vases, you couldn't tell which of them was actually making contact and which of them the contact was broken. In other words, it was a sham wire. So the wires didn't actually connect to the earth ground. And the question is, would the plants that were connected to the earth ground survive longer? Would they sustain their life longer now that they've been cut? And so here was day 0, here was day 3, here was day 6, and here's day 7. And you may notice that 2 of them look like they are not surviving as well. And as you could probably guess, these were the 2 that were electrically grounded, which of course we didn't know until after the experiment was completed, and then we checked the conductivity of the wires. These are the 2 that were grounded, and these are the 2 that were not grounded. And these kinds of experiments have been repeated regularly. In other words, the direct electrical connection and field connection to the earth matters. You can also quantify the degree of the amount of, if you would, vitality or greenness in the plant using state-of-the-art image processing systems. I'm not going to go through this procedure in any depth. By the way, this software, which is very sophisticated, anyone can download for free from jnih.gov. And you can then yourself readily be able to take pictures, look at the red, green, and blue components of an RGB image in any component to get the mean standard deviation. And you can see the plant that was grounded, for example, its green value was 189 compared to the control, which was not grounded, and the green decreased to 166.99. That was statistically significant. So then we can move on to the effects of sound and also healing energy on seed germination. I did this research with Kathy Kreth, who has a PhD in both optical sciences and in music. And this was part of her dissertation that I had the privilege to direct. And you could see what we did was we created literally a laboratory for presenting sounds to plants in a controlled environment, in this case, using material that you can purchase from any hardware store or on the internet. And we would put seeds in boxes and had ways of quantifying, measuring humidity and air temperature and so on, giving the sound and putting them in different parts of the room. We looked at 2 kinds of seeds. These are what are called okra seeds, and they were, you could see at a certain stage of sprouting. And these were zucchini seeds, which tend to take longer to sprout. We also compared this to energy healing, so we could compare the sound versus human intention. And what you can do is you can measure the percentage of seeds sprouted as a function of time, starting at time 0, and then quantifying their degree of sprouting over time. And what you'll notice, I'll show you this experiments 3 and 4 down here. The music, by the way, was Carlos Nakai flute music. Very, very pretty music. And you'll notice that the music, the rate of the seeds sprouting over time was higher in the music compared to either no music control or noise. So you have the same frequencies, but they're sort of essentially random noise. That random noise did not increase the rate of seed germination and sprouting as did music. And you'll notice VH, and this is the particular form of energy healing that we tested, which is called vortex healing. Its effects are comparable to music. Now, Besides doing these kinds of local sound experiments and intention experiments, it's also possible to do distant intention experiments. And again, look at their effects on the germination of seeds. And this is probably the most controversial of the research that I'll be telling you in terms of past research, because you're talking about groups of people at a far distance who are sending, as a group, positive intentions for the vitality, of seeds to grow. And what's important is how this relates to FLFE is, because of course, FLFE is distant intention in remote fields. We did a total of 6 experiments. It's kind of complicated. There were 120 seeds in a blinded distant group intention session, and then a second 120 seeds in a matched control non-intention session. So we're comparing sessions where people are sending energy to these seeds versus sessions where they're not. Furthermore, then within each session, the distant group intention and the control, the seeds are divided into 4 sets. So there were 30 seeds per group. They were labeled A, B, C, and D. Then one of the 4 sets of these are randomly selected as the intention targeted seeds. So one of those 4 are then going to be targeted specifically with the intention. And the other 3 sets become the non-targeted control seeds. So there were 90. The match control session used the same targeted and non-targeted control sets paradigm, but there were no intentions ever used. So they were broken into 4 groups. Each seed, wheat seed, was placed into an individual container when it was first examined, and then placed in dishes. The intentions were given. They were then put in under dark closed condition and then examined 10 days later, if I remember correctly. There were 6 experiments, as I said. One of the locations was in Sydney, Australia. They were all led by now I'm blocking on her name, Lynn McTaggart, apologize. Their group size, there were 600 people in the group. The target happened to be A. These were lay people. Then there was an online experiment done in London, 500 people. Target was C. In Rhinebeck, New York, there was 100 subjects. Target was D. Palm Springs, California, 130. Target was A. Austin, Texas, 110. The target was A. And these were all lay people. And then one of the groups, the Hilton Head, South Carolina, there were 500 people. Target was A. But these were individuals who were typically nurses and other related professionals who were trained and certified in Healing Touch International. So for the 6 experiments, the total number of seeds or subjects was 1,440. So what do we find? And they're all summarized in these 2 graphs, and I'll explain them so they make sense. So here on the what's called the y-axis, we're looking at the average length of the seed growth, the sprout, after the 10 days. The 2 data points on the left here were in the intention days, and the 2 or sessions, and these down here are the non-intention days. And the prediction would be that seeds that were in the intention days would show greater growth, all things being equal, than the non-intention days. And furthermore, the blue happened to be what were the targeted seeds, either A, B, C, or D in a given group. And the prediction would be that the targeted seeds would show even greater growth than the non-targeted seeds. And you could see that effect was there too. This pattern was clearly statistically significant, which was a very striking finding. Now you may be wondering, how come the non-targeted seeds in the laboratory on the intention days still did better than the non-intention days? And by the way, these were blinded experiments. Well, when we looked at the data more closely, we found a surprise. And the surprise was that one of the groups was far better than all the others, one of the 6. And it turned out to be the group that were the Healing Touch International people. Now remember, these are people who are trained in focusing their intention and sending positive healing intentions, both locally and distally, i.e. over distance. And notice there's the effect of the intention versus the non-intention day. But notice what happens for the control seeds, even during the intention day. They're showing no, quote, bleed over or exposure effect of the being present during the intention day. So what this tells us is that or implies is that the degree of focus matters and training may matter. So given this history, the last bit, which is the most, in some respects, the most fun, has to do with biophoton imaging of plants and hands of healers using state-of-the-art low-light CCD cameras, which can detect single photons of light in a pitch black environment. These cameras, they are two-dimensional, so they give you images as opposed to just individual data points in an analog fashion. These cameras are very expensive, and they have to be cooled in order to increase the signal-to-noise ratio. When we first started doing this research, because these cameras are so expensive, this camera was over $100,000, and it was cooled to minus 100 degrees centigrade by what's called a cryo tiger. This camera was owned by the Department of Radiology, and Kathy Kreth, who is an optical scientist as well as a musician, she was able for us to, quote, borrow the equipment, which means not take it out of the lab, but use it on evenings and on weekends when they were not running experiments. So we were able to collect data initially to determine whether or not we could use this to, first of all, be able to see what's called the biophotons, the actual invisible light to the naked eye that are emitted by all living things, especially plants, in the pitch black environment. And then could we use this to quantify effects? And this is a diagram that basically shows how this works. We did many experiments. I'll give you two illustrative images. This is one of my all-time favorite images, I must confess. These are three different experiments. This experiment involves slices of zucchini. This experiment, the middle one, used string beans. And here, the subjects of the plants were geranium leaves. Now, you'll notice in each case, the one on the left looks brighter than the one on the right. The reason is because we purposely put these plants against a black background and these plants against a white background. The prediction was that if you have a plant and it's in a pitch black environment, and by the way, you have to take exposures from 10 minutes to a half hour or even longer, long exposures to be able to see these clearly. If the plants are on a black background, the black is going to absorb light. So the only light that's going to get its way up to the top of the camera is going to be the light that's coming primarily from the plants themselves. So here you can see the plants, quote, glowing in the dark. This, quote, these different colors are created by the software that's an image processing to enhance being able to see the grayscale effects. These little white dots, those are actually cosmic rays, which turn out to be another dependent variable, although normally you would remove them when you want to look at biophoton images per se. However, and you can see that the different parts of the plant are showing different degrees of biophoton emission. What's fascinating, though, is when you put this on a white background and the white reflects light back up to the camera, what you notice is that there's actually light going between the plants, which are invisible under the black background. But you can see them under the white background. And not only that, there's a structure to it. These plants are interacting, they are communicating and generating structured patterns between them. And we've done a lot of experiments to document this. You'll also notice if there's no other plants going in the other direction, the light is not, quote, pulled as much, nor does it, quote, increase over time. This effect that we've described, we're now seeing, quote, auras in plants. Put that in quotes if you would. And by the way, people who say that they see auras in humans will often report that it's easiest to see them when people are standing against a white background. So do we replicate this effect with string beans? Well, there we are. Here are the string beans against a black background, beautiful, quote, glowing string beans in the dark. They're the cosmic rays, but there's no apparent auras between them. But you put them on a white background, and there they are. You can clearly see them. You see the structure. By the way, you can see that this string bean, its light is being pulled toward this string bean. You see how it's reaching out there? And then of course we can't see it because it's on a black background, but there are no string beans out here. So this string bean is not pulling its light and being attracted to, or attracting the light of an adjacent string bean because it's not there. Finally, here are geranium leaves, again, against the black background. There they are, glowing beautifully, the cosmic rays and so on, but we don't see any aura. But against the white background, the aura is revealed. So it's learning these parameters of how to quantify the invisible light enables us to better track and understand the effects of inserting or directing intention, energy, and so on to plants under controlled conditions. Finally, you can measure energy from the hands as well. We've done this research, and we've done this in healers sending loving energy to distant plants. The bottom two photographs here are literally photographs with a flash in the dark of a healer where her thumbs are placed toward each other on the left, or her hands are separated on the right. And because we were using a camera with now this is in our own lab with our own camera system, because again we're putting these in enclosed boxes. Of course, we couldn't fit a person in the box, so they had to put their hands on the station or the tray that held it. They had to be covered in a black sheet and so on, and then they were in a pitch black and separate room. Here now we have, you'll notice it says 10-minute exposures taken in total darkness. I did not, quote, colorize these images, so this is the grayscale. And these little black spots here, little black squares, those are, again, cosmic rays. They haven't been removed yet. And these, quote, ghostly images are literally, as you can see, the hands either together, more together, or apart. Now, again, this is in pitch black. One of the things I didn't notice until literally the preparation of this presentation was I actually noticed, I started thinking about, well, gee, is there light energy going between the two hands? Is there like two leaves of a plant, for example? And if you notice, there are more of these pixelated images, gray, in between the two hands than outside the hands. And what that tells us is, and suggests that one of the things we need to do is to be studying the energy and light interaction between people, both within people and between people. Again, as Clayton Kez says, so much research, so much opportunity here. So let's summarize this. Number one, being electrically connected to the earth increases plant vitality. I did that by giving you an example of longevity of sunflowers in vases, and how you could quantify literally the amount of green color, which relates to drying out and dying. Two, being exposed to Native American flute music, as well as energy healing, increases plant vitality. And we looked at that by looking at the sprouting of zucchini and okra seeds. Three, we looked at distant intentions of groups of interested seekers, lay people, as well as energy healers, how they increase plant vitality. And I presented the germination of wheat seeds as an example. Then four, we looked at biophoton imaging and showed how it can measure how physical proximity increases energy fields of plants. And finally, we talked about biophoton imaging can measure the energy of healers' hands as they send energy to distant plants. So now that we have this background, we can now look at and make more sense of the findings from the FLFE research. So we go on to part 3 here, customer reports about FLFE implants. And here's the quote: follow the evidence where it leads and be prepared for surprises. Well, as many of you know, regularly posted on Facebook or on the website are people's reports of effects that they observe in plants. I've selected 3 of ones that Maria gave me as illustrative. So here was one posted on Facebook by KS. She writes, I have to give an update. I have 3 days left on to my 2-week trial. I've noticed a calm demeanor to myself, and my husband is easy to snap out of negative talk and return back to a more positive demeanor. Huge for him, and also I'm sure for her. By the way, this is the kinds of data that we looked at, but in a formal way in the customer experience survey, which is the webinar that I gave previously. Then she writes, I've noticed that a leaf I pulled off my indoor bedroom plant has remained alive for almost 1 week. It's a little bit like the sunflower work. And our front lawn that we have not had for a couple of years is starting to come back. Bizarre, she writes. Then she says, I was contemplating if I should continue with FLFE, and this is when I was shown my front lawn through my inner guide. So she's now attributing a spiritual significance to noticing this effect. Posted on Facebook by AJ. Here's another one. I'm the only one in my neighborhood that has leaves on their trees. I know there are maples, but maples across the street have lost their leaves. I didn't include it, but even my bushes are hanging onto their leaves. Just wondering the thoughts on this. Remember, we did not correct any of the grammar or typing on this. Interesting. Here's another report posted on Facebook by DM. My Christmas tree has been taking in gallons of water this year. And we talk about hydration effects and so on. And unlike other years, has hardly dropped any needles at all. We haven't even swept underneath. That would be convenient. Wouldn't it be surprised if I saw roots? I wouldn't be surprised if I saw roots again when I took it out. Just another small confirmation for me about FLFE. Anyone else experienced this? Well, think about this. If we could actually bring this research into the laboratory, like we've brought other research into the laboratory that I've talked about earlier, and quantified these effects under controlled conditions, would we get positive results? And if so, wouldn't this have bearing upon our choice to and give us further incentive for wanting to at least test the FLFE hypothesis, to try the service and explore what benefits we can experience and receive? Well, following the evidence where it leads and being prepared for surprises is part of a book that I published last year, which is called Extraordinary Claims Require Extraordinary Evidence, which was a quote that was made famous by the distinguished astronomer and also skeptic, Carl Sagan. The subtitle of this book is The Science and Ethics of Truth-Seeking and Truth Abuse. The kinds of claims that we're talking about here are extraordinary. And if we have the ethics and a sense of responsibility, one does not want to make extraordinary claims without obtaining appropriate confirmatory extraordinary evidence. And what you're now going to see is evidence that is beginning this path. So we now move on to 2 experiments that were conducted before I learned about FLFE and was approached by FLFE, but I did have the opportunity to examine the data and look at it statistically. These 2 phase 1 small sample experiments, the first one was conceived and conducted by Jeffrey Stegman, and the second one was conducted by someone that he recruited, who was part of FLFE, Shannon Petrie. And I'll go through each of these 2 experiments so you can see. There were 2 groups in each experiment: the FLFE flagship program, its basic service, versus a control group, no FLFE control. That was the case in both experiments. The plant was spinach in one case and wheatgrass in another. The number of seeds per group, there were only 12 seeds in experiment 1 and 20 seeds in 22. Remember, this is a small sample, exploratory. The first experiment was not blinded. So you can always raise the question, well, could other variables that have been attributed to this related to differences in the way the experimenter possibly interacted with the seeds or whatever? But the second experiment was blinded, which is making this begin to look like a phase 2 type study. The growth system was hydroponic in both cases. The lighting was actually LED light, full spectrum light. There was continuous water in both experiments, continuous supplements. Supplements were used in both experiments. In one case, there was a 5G router, was not in the room. In another case, it happened to be in a room. And then days before the measurement, it was 21 days for the spinach experiment and 12 for the control. Well, what did the data look like at the end of the experiment? What is the pictures of it first? So here we go. These are photographs that were taken by Jeffrey of the two sets of the two conditions. One of them was the FLFE flagship, and one of them was the control. And I'm going to ask you, do you see a difference between these two? Any visible differences? And which one would you guess? Well, if you guess the one on the left, you would be correct that that was the FLFE flagship program. So now let's look at the results for the flagship program. Now remember, this was collected by a different person who was blind to which was which. One of these was the FLFE flagship, the other one was control. If you look closely, you look at the height, you look at the number of leaves and so on, you may notice that the one on the left seems to show more vitality than the one on the right. And if you did guess that, you would be correct. This is the way the data came out. So how do we quantify this? Well, one of the things you could do is measure the percentage of the seeds germinated. Now remember, in this study, there were only a total of 12 seeds and per condition. In this case, there were only 20. So although there are these percentages look like they're in the right direction, look, the percentage of seed germinated was almost double the size here for FLFE compared to the control, which is replicated here also in the blinded condition. What are called the n's are too small to apply statistical significance. But if you combine the two experiments, the n does reach a sufficient number to do what's called the chi-square. And when you do a chi-square, don't worry about this. This is just part of the statistics program. The chi-square number comes out to equal 4.06. The p-value is equal to 0.0438. And statistically, you would say it was p less than 0.05. And that is the level, p less than 0.05 or 1 in 20, that a statistician would say it is significantly greater than chance. That's the cutoff for the idea that this is probably not a chance finding. If we look at the percent number of leaves, which you can, by the way, literally score by counting the actual pictures, again, you can count, you can put the percentages, plot them here, which I have done, and you can see it's 69 versus 31% for the first experiment and the spinach, and 60 and 40% for the wheatgrass. Again, when you combine those two sets of numbers and you do a chi-square, it's p less than equals 5.08. The p-value is equals 0.0242, or p less than 0.03, which is slightly more statistically significant. So therefore, these data are suggestive that maybe there's a real phenomena, and therefore further experiments are warranted with ever tighter controls. So in this third experiment, which I had the privilege of being part of in its design, the inspiration for this came from Jeffrey and Miles. And Miles was the actual experimenter in this research, and he was kept blind to the conditions. And in this case, instead of there being two conditions, which the FLFE flagship versus control, which would be replicating the previous experiment, what you typically want to do in a phase 2 follow-up is you want to replicate and extend the experiment. So the experiment was extended by adding a third group, which is an experimental FLFE plant program. Plant program that was going to be tested for possible future application. The plants were spinach. The number of seeds per group turned out to be slightly different because originally what they did was they equated them for weight, but the weight does not equate for the total number of seeds. There were no statistically significant differences between the groups. And as you'll see, when you quantify the number of seeds in terms of their root size, for example, the numbers are really comparable. It was completely blinded. The growth system was actually a plant tent. The light, there was no light, it was done under dark conditions. The watering was done every 2 days. There were no supplements. There was no 5G router in the room. And it was 10 days before the experiment was, the data were analyzed. And this is a description of the testing environments, just so that we're all clear about what they are, especially some of you who may be watching this who are new to FLFE. So I will read this. It was prepared by Jeff and the team. The FLFE plant studies compare plant growth and vitality in different environments. The environments are the FLFE flagship. This is what is defined as the full FLFE service environment at a level of consciousness, the LOC, using the Hawkins scale of 560. Let's see, 560 on the Hawkins map. The experimental FLFE plant program was this experimental FLFE environment. It's designed to specifically support plant growth and vitality. The targeted high consciousness fields are up to 850 on the Hawkins map. There are applied, and additional support for the soil biodiversity is provided. And then, of course, the control is a no FLFE field. For the phase 1 spinach and wheatgrass experiments, the level of consciousness of the control was measured to be 420 on the Hawkins map, which was the previous 30-day LOC average of the area. And then you can see the other ones are at different levels. The controls have been measured independently using the Hawkins system. And this is going to be something that also is going to be experimentally tested under controlled conditions. We're going to focus just on the plant data. Now, here are the 3 different tents. They were carefully designed with even fans circulating the air to maintain the humidity and temperature in the environment. So you can see here's a sensor measuring both temperature and humidity, and you can see how they were quite comparable under normal circumstances. So let's look at the findings after 10 days. First of all, seed germination. Now, because this was a 10-day experiment, it was anticipated that most of the seeds would sprout. And that's in fact what happened. The control sprouting was 82%. The FLFE flagship sprouting was 84%, which is just slightly different and not statistically significant. But the FLFE plant experimental program, as you can see here, had a higher percentage, 96 versus 84%. It's a small difference, but when you look through the statistics, because of the large number, there were 161 seeds, if you remember this group, and 180 in the others, you can get these large statistically significant effects, which tell us that there's something that's not chance, that can't be attributed to a chance result. But more meaningful and practical, oh, and this is just a photograph to show you how the seeds were originally set up in the environment and then placed into the tents. And this also just shows you how the root length, which is the primary dependent variable as opposed to sprouting, occurs. These are the really interesting data. Here we have the number of grid crossings, which is a simple way to measure length. The average number separately calculated for the experimental FLFE plant program, the FLFE flagship program, and the control. And these are what are called t-tests because there's a large N, and these are analog or continuous variables. what you can see is that they're highly statistically significant. It's p less than 0.0000001. In fact, the experimental FLFE plant effect is higher statistically than both the flagship and the control. But you can see the flagship is clearly also higher than the control. Let me go back. I'm sorry about that. Oops. The flagship is clearly higher than the control. This is a very striking finding. And since you know that I'm, as a scientist, I try to apply in terms of truth-seeking strategies and values, the more extraordinary the claim, the more extraordinary the evidence. This is clearly a finding that one would want to replicate and extend under a few conditions. And we would have had those additional data, we think, by now, except due to the unexpected passing of Miles. So that this work will be continued. Meanwhile, it became possible to do an applied study to see whether or not FLFE service could be actually applied under farming conditions, where you could quantify quite precisely the yields from fields of plants. And the experimenter was Jeffrey Stegman. He was the one that developed this relationship with Wecker Farms, which is in Sedley, Saskatchewan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. There's a picture of the family, and this is a picture of the farm. This is a natural farm environment. And they were able to do an experiment where they compared the standard FLFE, the FLFE flagship, and the experimental FLFE plant program on a small, relatively, well, it's large by my standard, but still relatively small compared to the size of the total field that was examined, field of wheat. And this is, as I said, a natural farm. And I'm going to read to you what he wrote so you can understand that the degree of sophistication that gets examined even with field studies. Purpose was subdividing the single control group of acres into smaller subdivisions like the FLFE. Oh, this was in order to analyze the control data. So like the FLFE subdivisions for the purpose of a more detailed analysis of the total farms experiment. This is so we could do actual statistics on it. So Wicker Farms was invited to be a partner, and there's a software program provided by John Deere called myjohndeere.com, where you can literally quantify the amount of data that is being picked up in real time and then put up into the cloud by the tractors. It's truly extraordinary. So that we could subdivide the total control area similar to the procedure used to subdivide the FLFE acres. Subdivisions were created using a tool on the website, and that was called C1, was adjacent to and immediately below the lowest FLFE subdivision, which is called FLFE 6. C2 is adjacent to and below C1, and so forth for all 26 control subdivisions. Each subdivided section, as well as the FLFE sections, approximate the width of the field. Now, as his footnote indicates, there were two FLFE conditions. However, the number of subdivisions was too small. There were only three areas for each of the FLFE conditions to do any statistics on them, or even to be to compare the means. But if you combine the two and you have a large control sample, it permits statistical analysis. So this is literally how the computer operates in terms of the John Deere software. And the critical you can see all these variables in terms of the speed of the tractor and the productivity of that, the number of acres per hour and the working time and the total fuel. I mean, and they measure the things like and the most important measure here is the bushels per acre in a given slice. And this is the total field. So you can see in the next one here are the initial two of the FLFE, and here are the last two of the control. And this constraint was required by the nature of the farming data under this initial experiment. So what do we find? Bushels per acre calculated objectively by the John Deere data. When you combine the FLFE flagship and the experimental FLFE plant services, the bushels per acre were 22.01 bushels. The control area, of which they were able to get 26 segments, was 17.91 bushels. And when you do the t-test, the p-value is p less than 0.000001, which comes out to be a 22.88% increased yield for this farm data. Now let's just stop and think about this for a second. If this could be replicated, and replicated under ever more controlled conditions, the idea that a technology that FLFE has been developing could be used to enhance food production, let alone maybe even the vitality of the plants itself, that alone would be a profound contribution for humanity and the planet. So here now, part 6, a summary, and we'll look at the future, some future FLFE research directions. These are the first two experiments that we looked at. Here I'm just showing the percent number of leaves, and you can see that clearly the flagship FLFE higher than the control in both groups. That p-value for this initial pilot phase is p less than 0.03. We then did the controlled experiment. This was the Miles experiment, now having 3 conditions. There were the results, both higher than the control, and where the experimental program looked like it was even better. So it needs obviously more research. And then finally here was this opportunity to do the initial first controlled experiment. And this was blinded, by the way, in the fact that the farmers didn't know which was which of course is important. And there again are the findings. So what is it fair to conclude? 1, the data from the 4 experiments reveal replicated, statistically significant, and relatively large positive effects on plant vitality in the FLFE environment. There are always caveats in research, especially when you're doing initial research, and this is still initial research. So that one would not want to conclude, especially with such an extraordinary set of claims, that these were definitive findings. But the only way you're ever going to do the ever more controlled experiments is because you have positive results to begin with. And so under these set of 4 controlled experiments, you have to conclude that something real appears to be happening. 2, these positive effects confirm and extend FLFE customers' observations of increased health and growth of plants in their homes and around their properties. Remember, that's where it started. It started because customers are giving reports, and that made sense from the founders of the FLFE system. 3, these positive effects cannot be attributed to placebo effects and expectancy in the plants, since experiments 2, 3, and 4 were blinded to the plants and the experimenters. Now, if you were a parapsychologist, you would still ask the question, well, what about the intention of the experimenters? And how do you control for the possibility of the intention of the experiment versus the FLFE itself? And by the way, this is a fundamental question in parapsychology. And the way that you address this question in part is by designing ever more levels of blinding and continuing to obtain positive results. And then finally, the Wicker Farm findings, experiment 4, suggests that FLFE may have practical applications to improving crop yields, as well as to the vitality of the crops produced or grown. So, what are some future FLFE plant research? And by the way, before I share what we in the research team are looking forward to doing, what I'm hoping is that it's going to come out of this presentation is that some of you who are listening, you're going to say, oh, gee, I noticed this with my plants. And wow, you ought to go try this with your, and boy, I would love to know what would happen if you did X. I suspect, and I certainly see Clayton smiling right here in the corner. I can't see Jeff right now. My sense is that FLFE loves to receive ideas of the things that you experience that bring you excitement, joy, wonder, and questioning, and so on. And to the extent that they can be brought in and addressed under scientific conditions, it's part of the joy of being able to do this kind of research. Well, first of all, we want to replicate and extend the phase 2 seed germination, root growth, and leaf growth experiments conducted under controlled laboratory as well as field customer experimental conditions. In other words, not only can we do the Miles Stegman-like experiments and have them replicated in a controlled laboratory, but you can also set up controlled enough experiments where lay people, like all of us, even as a scientist, I'm a lay plant person, that's for sure. When it comes to growing plants and such, that one can collect data like the sunflower seeds data with the earthing. One can do experiments in the real world, and lots of people could collect data, and you can do them under blinded conditions and so on. Phase 2, another level, is phase 2 yeast growth and resilience studies conducted under controlled laboratory conditions. Part of the reason for using yeast growth as well as resilience is because of the importance of yeast, obviously, in the growth process, and also you can do very sophisticated controlled experiments with the cellular, at the cellular level. 3 is follow up the phase 2 farm studies with possible soil and protein analyses and other plant nutrient comparisons. Very exciting. And then 4, phase 2 biophoton imaging of plants growing in the FLFE environment, with the goal of providing clues as to the mechanisms of how FLFE works. So imagine you can actually do plant science, but you can also use these state-of-the-art technologies for quantifying, for example, patterns of light and other electromagnetic signals under controlled conditions. And that opportunity is now being afforded to us because I'm privileged to have a laboratory at the University of Arizona called Laboratory for Advances in Consciousness and Health. We have a state-of-the-art biophoton imaging system. As you know, we've done research both on plants, humans, and the environment. And we can now apply this technology in creative ways using this facility. And we are going to be further, since it's a laboratory in consciousness and health, the idea of studying higher and high consciousness theory and fields becomes something that can be a focus for this part of the laboratory. You can see that this is my laboratory facility is in a medical square complex, very close to the medical school, and also very close to the main campus. It has a lot of advantages of being off campus, both the medical school and the main campus. And one of the major reasons we have lots of free parking. We have 2 suites. One of these suites is devoted to our afterlife science, survival consciousness, soulful science. But the other laboratory, which has been where a lot of our energy healing research has gone on and so on, will now can be devoted to the evolution of consciousness and the high consciousness fields. I should confess that I selected these pictures partly because we were talking about plants, and there was a time up until a few years ago where we actually had green grass in the area. It was really nice environment, but in Tucson, you know, and with the water crisis and like there good reasons to reduce, go back to more natural plant growth. And so now this is a stone environment. It's still very pretty desert. And now I would like to just end this presentation with a surprise, a really great surprise. And I should explain that when it occurred to me that it would really be delightful to share this, that idea only occurred to me yesterday. And so I decided that I would, and because Aditi was on the preparatory call this morning, I asked her if it would be okay if we could share the observation that she as a user has made, and also whether it would be okay to use her name. So she gave me permission, as long as she said it was for the best and highest good. And so I'm sharing it with that intention. This picture I literally took from our phone conversation while we were having this conversation. I took it with my iPhone on the screen, and I'm so glad that she's allowed us to use this. Now, here is what she shared with us when I gave a preliminary presentation to the staff. This is a giant plant. I think a night something or the night orchid or whatever. I apologize if I don't have the plant name correctly. This is a spontaneous event. You'll notice it's quite large, and you'll notice that it's growing up the wall, and the leaves tend to be leaning more toward the wall than they are toward the light, which seems a little bit strange, except for the fact that it turns out that the FLFE field in their house is focused on the room next door, implying that the plants might be growing to where the energy is coming from. The hypothesized energy is coming from. And one of the things that it is possible to do is you can measure literally not only the movement of plants during the day, because certain plants will track light as it goes from the east side of the sky to the west side of the sky, but you could also quite well quantify the potential attraction to the energy field. Now, remember the cucumbers, remember the string beans, remember the geranium leaves, okay? Remember what looks like is taking place even between the hands. Is it possible, if we do controlled research, that we can uncover the plants being attracted to the field? The answer is, we don't know. The experiment has never been done. But if you don't entertain the hypothesis and you don't look for it, you won't be able to find it. You've probably heard this phrase, seeing is believing. If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. That's the classic phrase. But as the great philosopher, who was actually Yogi Berra, who reversed it, he said, if I hadn't believed it, I wouldn't have seen it. And sometimes if you're not open to the idea of finding something, you'll never see it, you won't discover it. And so my last slide is to end this by, again, celebrating Miles and his inspiration for this work. This is a picture of Miles in Australia, and the Australian wine country. Apparently he appreciated wine, among other things. And there's something very inspiring about seeing people and plants and the green and the life and so on. And this work has great opportunity, and the journey continues for all of us, both here and in the greater reality. And with that, I think I can stop.
Thank you, Gary. That was amazing. And thank you for your, dedication to Miles. It's beautiful.
It's a lot of information presented in a very systematic way. It helps connect all the dots. Yeah, thank you, Gary.
My pleasure.
Well, we're moving into the Q&A portion and love to talk with you all. There's several ways you can join in. You could put your questions into Q&A. And I know you've been using the chat, but if you could please switch over to the Q&A, that would help us. And you can raise your hand virtually, and we can call on you to speak with us. And you can do it with or without video. It should be your choice there. So yeah, I should mention that in that plant, in Aditi's plant, Aditi and Ashutash's plant, which you saw there, that there is a special meditation zone on the other side of that wall. That's a much higher level of consciousness. And so that's really interesting to see that plant growing towards that.
Yes, by the way, the Wecker Farms was a 10,000 acre organic farm. So it's a large farm. It's not just a couple acres.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like Tammy's got her hand up. Would you like to join us, Tammy? Should be unmuted now.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know how to put my face on, but that's okay. I want to thank you for this webinar. I haven't been able to make a lot of them in the last year or so. So this one's close to my heart. I am a gardener and I've had a little bit of schooling. So I'm following that, and I had FLFE on our house for about 4 years, and we moved halfway in between. So I've noticed the effect on things on both locations. So my question is, has anybody noticed the effect on the growth of insects, particularly outside? Because we have an abundance of ants, and I don't know if this is just, they just love the place. I don't like to use any kind of pesticides, so I'm looking at possibly getting more in touch with nature and Mother Planet and such like, but I don't know how to look at it that way. Maybe they just love the environment. I know that my plants, I like to take most of the credit for the plant material that's growing around, and the neighbors are growing very well. But I know that a lot of that has to do with FLFE, and I'm just so thankful. But have you noticed an increase in that kind of activity? So that's my question. Insects.
Yes.
We do have a lot of nice bees.
Well, when the environment's increased in its support for life, everything is supported. We haven't, tried to exclude any, insects or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. I certainly haven't noticed that myself. And we have had other people ask about that as well. And there certainly are a lot of factors around insects,
Yeah, well, I just don't want to go and start a war with my ants population. But yeah, it's quite amazing. I've worked with clay because I live in Alberta. And so clay is, you have to work with the soil and all that. But even despite, like, I have a cute squash plant that I planted, and one of the nice branches broke off, and so I stuck it in my water barrel, and then of course it's rooted. So I love that. You can just throw something somewhere, and in Alberta it'll still grow. It's really difficult to grow here. So yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense that the insects, of course, would benefit from that. Just common sense that I was just a little bit frustrated. And someone in the chat said try homeopathy, so I will look that up. Thank you.
Well, I tried something. We have a farm we recently bought, and I noticed I had ants inside the kitchen.
Oh,
and so I sat down and I sort of, called in FLFE's course on the farm. And I connected to the FLFE energy, and I asked the ant people to kind of up the chain of the ant people to ask the ants to move elsewhere, to move outside. So I used the FLFE energy, the higher consciousness field, to have an intention for the ants to please move, because I don't want to hurt them, by putting poison down. So,
Right.
And I have not had any ants since I did that.
Thank
I
you
haven't
for
seen a
that.
single ant, so I don't
Yeah,
know if
thank
that's.
you. No, we had a multi-generational house, so different people want to put the ant traps down, but I really draw a line between hard things, and that the only thing that's been in this house has been an ant trap. They did try using dandelion killer, but I put a stop to that. There has to be a balance, and I will try that. Thank you so much. Yeah, Jeffrey, that makes so much sense.
Pamela in the chat said she did the same thing.
Yeah, I will give that a try, because I have done that with the planet grid, with trying to connect with Mother, and I have tried that, but I don't think I was in the right frame of mind, so I will work on that. Definitely work on that.
I spent a week with Dorothy McLean once, who was one of the founders of Finhorn. I don't know if you heard of Dorothy.
Yes,
McLean.
I have. Yeah, this is wonderful.
Up here, actually, she was up at the north end of Kootenay Lake at a place called Johnson's Landing Retreat Center.
Oh, goodness.
I'm going to say it was 15 years ago, her and Freya Seacrest. And we talked to the Delvic Kingdom. And I mean, we're kind of out there, but since Jeff brought it up,
No, that's not out there for me. That is right up my alley.
I mean, it is a pretty safe experiment. I think it would, at least in the category of safety, would probably meet Gary's approval. So we practiced for a week, and she was training us in talking to plants and talking to the kingdoms of insects in particular, because people were interested in that, and so I just want to support. They've had some of the most amazing results in growing plants that I've ever seen. I don't know the level of scientific analysis on it, Jeff. I've just seen or Gary, I've just seen pictures of their squashes and other vegetables, cabbages in particular, that are, like 22-pound cabbages. You just don't find those in many places. So that's just another support along those lines. And they have consistent results, and at least to the degree that I've seen. And Finhorn is a very well-established community. So I just wanted to encourage you to try that.
I will.
And sometimes you can ask them, if they want something, if there's something they're trying to eat. I mean, you're basically going on intuition if there's something in the house that they're wanting to eat. And if you could say, well, I can put some of that in a place where, if you believe that you can hear that thought from that kingdom.
I can. Yeah, I do believe in that. Yeah, and we have multiple sites, and are just enjoying everywhere.
The one thing about insects that I believe is true is that they'll tend not to come around plants that are really vital and be a nuisance. They tend to go towards plants that are sick in some ways. Now, I know that's true for some plants, because I've seen fields. I used to own a health food company years ago, and then there's like fields of really healthy, vital organic food, and there was a field next to it that was heavily sprayed and was just, the land hadn't been taken care of for a long time. And a bunch of grasshoppers came and ate the field of the sick plants and just left the field of the healthy plants alone. It was like amazing. Right,
stressed plants are easier to invade. Absolutely. These are good points. Asking them if there's something that they need, because in the long run, I know that the bees are happy. I see them smiling, and as long as we're on those conversations, and in talking to you now with the ants, I think I've got to get into a different frame of mind. So this is good. This is very helpful.
But if they want a double fudge hot banana split sundae from Dairy Queen, It might be a thought from your son or daughter. I don't know.
That might be.
Do that line.
That's right. I know, right? Yeah. Having you said that, there, I do the companion planting as well. And so that the marigolds are helping. But yeah, there's one in a great big tub of flowers that they just invaded the tub. They were so happy to be there. I was so frustrated. So my frustration, you know, that kind of has a lot to do with the failure that I have. And I don't call it failure, but yeah, mismanagement, perhaps. As far as the other insects go, you know, water can take a great deal of insects away.
Yeah, gardening or farming is always a learning experience.
Yeah, I love the organic aspect of herbs and kelp and horsetail for fungus. It's just there's so many things. Just have to research. So I really appreciate this webinar. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's good to get connected again with all these people.
Thank you, Tammy, for joining us.
Thank you for being a subscriber, Tammy.
Yeah.
Should we bring Suzanne in, and then we'll go to the Q&A after that? We don't want to neglect our questions in the Q&A. But get your Tammy should be able to. Let's see.
Oh, I think we have
Suzanne. Yeah, there we go. We had a Suzanne. You should be able to hear us.
Hi, Jeffrey. Hi, everybody. This is like amazing. I just love it. And the aspects of talking, I'm an animal communicator, but it just reminds me again to talk to the higher consciousness of the mosquitoes, because we get lots here this year. So my question is around my brother's doing our farm in Germany. So he's running the farm in Germany, but he has a lot, like in Germany, it's not like in North America where you have big fields. Like there's little spots there and there. How would FLFE work for that? Like if he would want to be on that, would he have to bring all the coordinates for all the different?
Yes, I mean, for FLFE to work, we need to identify the land where it is located. So what we're going to have on the website is a place for people that want to join into the experiments and join us for the next round. And we'll have some, you know, guidelines around who's eligible or how to do that. So we'll have that up. Probably might be a week or so before we get it up. But in the meantime, you can always send a request to your CRS, the person that takes care of you in FLFE, with any kind of farms that would like to join this study.
Okay.
So what we need to do for the study, as Gary's laid out, to have a big enough study where there's enough data points in the FLFE sections and enough data points in the control.
Yeah,
and so
makes sense.
Having the equipment to measure that and be able to chop it up into data points, we did these long strips. If we could have turned those into by acre, if we could have known by acre what the yield was, we would have had a lot more data points. But so anything you'd like to say about that, Gary?
You said it perfectly. It's interesting, by the way, to hear an animal communicator also raising these questions in relationship to farms, because when I was thinking about the previous questioner and talking about the intentions of the ants and so on, and changing and the invitation to ants. I mean, normally mainstream people would say that's ridiculous. What an extraordinary thing to say. And yet there's so much data, quote, anecdotal data, as well as some experimental data. But I have this, some of you know, I have this disease called science. I sort of can't help it. Somebody says something interesting and it immediately turns into a question, and then a hypothesis, and then an experiment jumps in. And I was just thinking about what fun it would be to do some research with insects, for example, and to see whether or not both the intention effects and the FLFE effects could be used, and documented in a positive way. And just this is also a coincidence, but I'm actually now working with an animal communicator to do some research. She's the lead person for this, to do research on equine therapy with vets who have PTSD, and the extent to which that can be enhanced with animal communicators who communicate with the horses and get information that can be determined as being accurate and not from a paranormal sense, and then seeing the extent to which that further enhances the therapeutic relationship between the vet and the horse, and therefore the improvement. And she did her doctoral dissertation on this and obtained, intriguing findings worthy of doing, more research. So
we have a lot of equine therapists on FLFE, Gary.
Really?
Yeah, we have a horse, an equine therapist in the office. She's not a professional, but she does work with traumatized animals. And,
well, synchronicity
rescues.
never ceases. Then I just have to do this because we have to have it honor at least one synchronicity. Okay. So here we go. Last night, every night, I try to read a few pages from a mystery novel. So I keep my mystery mind alive. And I'm reading a novel called The Black Box. And literally last night, and I'm not sure if you can see this or not, I've got them colored in green, but can you read that?
As if
John Deere dealership. John Deere.
John
Yeah.
Deere.
Well, what are the odds of reading about John Deere in a mystery novel in LA? And then also they refer to coincidence. So I just think that's a way of a little bit of an added celebration to today's webinar.
I would like to talk a little bit about the animal communication and actually how in my experience it works. Well, how they work for me, because they bring the people to me and the animals have health or behavioral issues and the vets can't help and the people are about to put them down, or asked, is it time for letting them go? And then the animals show what the people need to do for themselves. And then they, like magic, they heal and it's gone, like often within actually seconds, a day. And when the people do what they need to do, for themselves or for the animals. So, and I don't really know how to explain that very well, but I don't know, it's just like magic. When they get the message across, they put down the big billboard sign, like, throwing up or can't stand up anymore, or, leash aggression gone within one session. But it's because the people take ownership of their emotions often and step into their power, and then the animals relax and everything is fine. And I'm not sure, like it's just magical. I would actually love, now that I'm listening to you guys, I have a bachelor in environmental science. I think, maybe I should start to really think more about this as an experiment. And so, it can actually be proven, because a lot of people say, what, how can it be proven? So you're doing me a good favor here. Thank you.
It's great to have someone with your background on, Susan. I felt a bit self-conscious about interrupting you there earlier, so glad you got to speak.
Yeah, no, it's all good. All perfect divine timing. Thank you.
That's such a beautiful concept, that the animal is bringing the person to the animal communicator to heal the person. Yeah,
my background is like, I had chronic fatigue for like 15 years. So I have a lot of holistic, I trained myself in all these different aspects. So I'm very well rounded. Like, I'm not an acupuncture, but I can tell people, okay, your dog needs acupuncture. I can do it energetically on their meridians, or I can do energetic chiropractic adjustments on them. But it always comes that the person needs to step up. When the person doesn't step up, whatever I do does not work. Because the animals still need to keep the message there, right? It's like if you don't check your engine light needs to be on. That's pretty much it. And it's really like magical. I don't know. I don't have any other words for it, because it's literally what they always show me. It's the animals dragging the people to me. You know, I help the animals to help the people. And so when the vets can't find anything, it's because it's not in the animal, it's in the energy field. And this is where FLFE helps, right? Because it heals, it takes over healing the people, and the animals don't have to take like my dog would get a bladder infection when I was pissed off and didn't own it because somebody left the campfire unattended, right? And then I was doing homeopathy, energy healing, and nothing worked. And then it hit me. It was me. I was pissed off. I should have had the bladder infection, but my dog was more honest about the emotion than I was.
Wow. There's so much in what you're saying that, you know, because we talk about consciousness fields a lot on our podcasts. And so that interaction of the pet and the owner, you know, with that love connection that they have, that field interaction is, yeah, it's showing up in the animal. I've never really considered that before. That's really interesting.
It's the same with kids, right? You think you're coming home, and now on top of that, the kid acts up. No, the kid's acting up because you come home. It's like working in the garden, and then you come in, you have dirty hands, and you rub them off on your dog. We need to take ownership of, and wash the hands. That's what we do with the hand, right? And then come to the pet, right? But we're like, oh, I hug my pet, it makes me feel better. Yeah, because now your pet is basically dealing with the dirt. I'm saying it in the just so we have a picture, right? And so one of the things is what I explain to people is to clear the energy field of the animals. And then it's like we would have a shower, right? Do that every day. And then I don't even know if you need it when you have FLFE, honestly. But it clears the energy of the animals and the people at the same time, because we connected, right? And people often do it more for the animals, rather for the animals than themselves.
There's the intention of clearing by doing the shower. Yeah, the intention of clearing the energy field. Yeah,
and it makes such a difference.
I'm sure Gary's research brain is going, it's mine in as well. Like, we're this field effect between, us and our pets, to how to, take that into an experimental setting. But that's really interesting. Thank you for bringing that to us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. And I did interrupt my service for like one day. And while I was shifting around. And then I was in town and things didn't go well. And I thought, oh, I just have to take an FLFE boost. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? Payment thing, it elapsed. And it's like, oh my God. And I re-signed, and it's like, I cannot live without this, I can live without food, but I'm not living without FLFE. So I can probably manage not living, breathing more, or, breatharian, but I'm not letting go of FLFE. Nope, not, no.
That's a testimonial. I don't know if I could see him say that, but
I don't think I've gone without it.
She just one-upped us, Jeff. That's the new standard.
Yeah, I don't think I've gone without it for a day, but for 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah, I really noticed it. I put my phone down the other day, took my ring off, and was out of the field for about half the day. And like the world was a duller place. It was not the same. Yeah, I do it once in a while.
Yeah. You have an awesome product. I mean, and I'll talk to my brother and see if he wants to, because I 22% more yield. I mean, you can't beat that.
Yeah, and we'd love to do more testing with bigger farms, more farms under these control conditions. And yeah, so we're ready to work with farmers and do more studies.
And if you ever need an animal communicator in one of your, experiments, I'm totally keen. As I said, I do have a scientific background. And I'm thinking that maybe that's the coincidence I needed to think I didn't waste my time on that.
Great.
Because,
Great.
like the same thing is like you can do environmental protection up the yin yang. If people's consciousness is not elevated, it's never going to work. We're just, swimming against the current instead of changing the current into where people cannot. I cannot throw garbage like, maybe sometimes something blows off and then I run down the street, catch the piece of paper. And that was my realization. There's no point in keep doing environment, and getting frustrated about people. It's about elevating people's consciousness, and and it's all, as Gandhi said, it's all be the change you want to see in the world. So I have to elevate my consciousness, and this is what FLFE makes much, helps a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Susan, or Suzanne. Do you prefer Suzanne?
It's okay, Suzanne. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our mission of supporting the evolution of consciousness, it really does seem that when consciousness rises, many of these problems disappear. That it is the way we're holding the earth, the way, our intention towards the earth, the level of consciousness of it, as we rise, these problems will work their way out. Should we get on the Q&A and then we'll come back to you, Gillian, after that? I'll pop up some questions, put my glasses on.
Yeah, lovingness is much less likely to do damage in the world than hatred, obviously. It seems to be pretty self-evident, but it's worth saying.
And there's a power in that loving level of consciousness that's very strong. Do you want me to read these out, Clayton?
Well, I'll take Sonia's. We don't do individual measurements on our property. If we were doing, but we do check the properties every day. Once a week, we check the entire, everybody on the service. 98% of the time, we check all the properties within 24 hours. Over the last year, probably there's been a few days when we maybe didn't check them, the new ones on every day, but we would check them within 48 hours. So we don't do calibrations, individual calibrations, Sonia. Thanks for asking.
So Naz was asking, will the improved plant FLFE be available to us? We don't know at this time. It's meant to be large-scale farming. And so we're really still in the experimental phase of it. So we will have to say, not at this time, but we'll let you know as we move further along.
Valerie is asking, I wonder what is the benefit of having FLFE focus on a single room in the house? FLFE is focused on, it's on the entire property. It's just that in that particular case, DDU is part of the experimental team and having a certain, a very high level of consciousness on one room in the house. And the plant, from what I can tell, I won't speak to this with a certainty, but it appears the plant has some way of knowing that room has very high consciousness on the other side of the wall and is moving towards there instinctively. So when you sign up for a free trial or you're a subscriber, it goes on the entire property, and the average is at the level of the slider. Defaults to 560 and actually defaults to 550, sorry. Defaults to 550. We turned it down because of the intensity some people are experiencing. And there is typically, there is a vortex on the property where the where the energy comes onto the property. And we've had subscribers, including our head of research, Lewis Humphreys. His vortex happened to go down into the pool of his home. And he called us in the beginning. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe when I go in the pool. And his pool was very high consciousness. So that was kind of interesting. I'm gonna tell you the number, it was pretty high. And so there will be higher places on the property. The average is what you set on the slider, but we don't focus on any particular room. If you're good at kinesiology, you can find the vortex and sit in that. It's a little bit higher.
Yeah, you could try using a pendulum as well to locate the vortex in your house, and hopefully it's somewhere comfortable where you could sit. Mine happens to be out in the middle of the porch or the entry to the house, so it's not as get rained on out there. So Patty's asking for some experimental ideas of how to use the FLFE field. I'm assuming that's what you meant there, Patty. And you know, the ant experiment was one that we mentioned earlier, that using the FLFE energy. So the way that I do it, and I'll pass it to you, Clayton, is, you know, I just sit in meditation, and sometimes I speak out loud. So I'll ask the FLFE energy to infuse or increase the strength of my request, and to go to what I'm requesting. So in the case of the ants, you know, I was kind of going up the chain of consciousness of ants and asking the top ants, to whatever they might be, to talk to this the ant people, to talk to this nest and have it move. And so I was picturing it, and I was picturing it outside, and I was asking the FLFE energy to communicate with the ants to move it outside. I know you've done some as well, Clayton.
Yes, we've had a few subscribers, particularly a lady in Austin, Texas. I'm trying to remember her name. Can't remember it right now, but it might come to me. And she is very kind of advanced, I would say, in consciously connecting with the FLFE energy on her property and directing it to healing parts of her body. And there is a conscious intelligence associated with a high consciousness field, particularly FLFE, and you can work with that to direct it to heal your body. I mean, to some degree, I've had aches and pains that I've asked the energy of FLFE to go through the minerals in the earth and pick up tiny bits of nutrients and direct it to, say, a muscle cramp, because I'm assuming there's an inappropriate amount of nutrients that the muscle can't relax. And I've had results with that over time. So that's another example. But just to make the point that there is an opportunity for you to work with the FLFE energy more consciously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you're not working with it in that way.
Mm-hmm. And certainly I use it all the time to clear things from my system. You know, if I'm working on an issue that's come up for me where I'm not at peace about something, or like Clayton said, there's something going on in my body that when we calibrate on it, it's not this lifetime, it's, you know, multiple, somehow karmic or multiple lifetime, then I will ask the FLFE energy, you know, to lift that from me or to clear it. So I'll be working on clearing it using energetic medicine tool and the FLFE energy. So the environment, you know, the mission is supporting the evolution of consciousness. So the environment's really there for you to use. And, you know, one of the ideal ways is to raise your consciousness with it. And, you know, clearing those, looking at those areas where you're not at peace, and applying there to clear it.
Yeah, there's probably an underutilized co-creative capacity in the FLFE community to work consciously with the technology. I would say that's true for me, and I'm, you know,
Yeah, at times we're busy running the
Yes.
business and working on the next research and programs. And yeah, I'm not sitting down in my meditation chair as much as I would like to. So Andrea's asking, are biodynamic preparations part of the FLFE plant programming? So the experimental program does have some biodynamic principles in it related to phases of the moon. So that was something that had come out while we were programming that. So there are some things, but thank you for that prompt, and I'm going to look more into biodynamic practices and see what else could be incorporated into the program. Thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, there's organic farming, there's biodynamic farming, there's many different ways of looking at farming. And so I think this, now that we see that there's some commercial potential to help people have better food, we'll probably take another look at that research, Jeff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of plants work better when other ones are grown beside it, but I don't know if we can do anything with that.
Mm-hmm. So looks like there's a question from Gillian in the Q&A, and oops, I don't see her hand up anymore. Should we answer that one, Clayton?
Well, she just put her hand up. Look at her, she's paying attention.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
So thank you so very much, all of you, for your amazing work and your love work. So I have two things I wanted to bring up, but I'm going to speak first to that co-creative capacity that Clayton was talking about, and you were as well around using FLFE proactively or directionally.
Mm-hmm.
That's one takeaway that I'm getting today, is that my earlier impression was that I'd be, me and my property, my plant life would be a passive recipient of FLFE, but I'm understanding that I have to be a participant in that. And that's exactly what's happened around the property that I own. It is an Indian Rune property in Cornville, Arizona. I've actually been working also with your intuitive team in the background. I just sent in a report last week. And for me, my experience, I'm a highly sensitive, I'm electrically sensitive. There are multiple things happening with this property. The intuitive team came back with what I knew to be true, was that there had been historical trauma here.
Mm-hmm.
And my sensitivity to the LFE was through the roof. Like, I couldn't actually tolerate it very well, possibly because I'm not very finely tuned myself. But what unfolded in the last 2 months of experimentation, I facilitate systemic constellations, is real life synchronicities. You could say clues to cracking open the original fractal of trauma, the original initiating trauma, historical experience on this land, which dates to the conquistadors brought here by the Hopi, and a massacre taking place on the property. And what was amazing about this is that this was not conjectured. It was revealed by the field of energy itself through incredible coincidences that, of course, were not coincidences, but required that I kind of intuit and understand what was being offered. So, for example, one of the really important clues was that in the wake of 2-3 days of other clues showing up, synchronicities showing up, a complete stranger came to a potluck at my house, a community potluck that I was hosting, and brought me the very unusual gift of Castile yellow roses. And I immediately knew intuitively that this was significant. So I had to present those roses to the mesa behind my house where these ruins are. And she placed them on my altar. For the first time ever, I had Chinese wealth cones set up in a circle on my altar, and she placed those roses in between. And those two things and a vision that was had by my mother, who's not into visions, many years ago when I was buying the property, of a Virgin Mary on the Mesa. This and other things suddenly, boom, 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 got the picture together. And because Castile roses were in the 1500s in Europe, the Virgin Mary made apparitions also in the Americas and Mexico, the Virgin of Guadalupe, through the scent of roses, and often would leave roses behind as evidence of her having been there. So the rose was highly symbolic of the conquistadors' Catholic faith, and the yellow rose in particular, I did some research in Catholicism from this period, represented the absolute authority of God as vested in as Queen of Heaven. And of course, the Catholic conquistadors thought of themselves as Lord over these lands. And a subsequent constellation that we did revealed that some of what was happening here was that there was death on this land that was not like souls were trapped in energy fields because they had not received, for example, the soldiers, the conscripted Catholic soldiers who had committed sin because they'd raped, could not confess their sins before dying on this battlefield, and therefore could not transition, could not ascend. And likewise for Native American souls who did not have that same issue, but were not accompanied in their transition by their loved ones, their living loved ones. I mean, there's so many synchronicities that came together, boom, boom, boom. And the energy here has considerably shifted for everyone since this historical trauma imprinted on the land or held here in the fields over this land could be resolved. So I just wanted to share that report with you because it's about co-creative capacity, right? I'm not an animal communicator, but I facilitate constellations, and it's in the medium of constellations which is also about tapping into a knowing field that this collaboration, you could say, happened. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I have been working very hard to get a proposed 100-foot macro cell tower at the mouth of my street, relocated out of this riparian valley, which is a rural area with lots of endangered species and whatnot. And as an aside, I feel like the location of that tower is part of this historical trauma thing. But I've been doing a lot of research on the effects of non-ionizing electromagnetic fields on fauna and flora, and there's an incredible review that came out last year by Blake Levitt and Henry Lay and Albert Manville, and there's incredible information about how insects resonate or work with sometimes man-made electromagnetic fields because they work with, earth magnetic fields. And in particular, this business about ants, it's been observed that ants, and I have many of these nests on my property, are comfortable in geopathic locations. And apparently it's because researchers are speculating or have found, suggesting that it's because ants as a colony, as a biomass, can actually, through their own bodily proportions and antennas, redirect electromagnetic fields away from their nests, which I find completely fascinating. So one of my technical questions for you is, well, the other point is that insect populations are dropping dramatically as a result of man-made radiation, because in other species like bees and butterflies, the phenomenon of resonance can inhibits an insect's ability to resonate, to navigate, orient, forage, etc., reproduce even. So can FLFE help the insect populations cope with the extraordinarily dense and rising levels of man-made ambient radiation. Sorry, that's a lot I've thrown at you, but that's all of it.
There's a lot to comment on there, Jeff. You want to take the first? We could probably get Gary to sort of chip in at some point on how many synchronicities does it take to create statistical validation, and how do you interpret synchronicities? But that's a little bit beyond my thinking.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, Gillian. It's so interesting. As far as the insects and FLFE, with the EMF mitigation, we're finding that humans and plants, we're right in the midst of collecting data for an EMF sensitive study for people that were in the FLFE environment. There was a full survey that was done with them, and we're just collecting the final ones, and then we'll be reporting on that at some future date. But and what we're seeing is relief, that we saw that in our small survey that we did early on, is that many people were feeling relief from their symptoms of sensitivity to EMF. So, we can speculate that it would, there would be a benefit for insects. We haven't done any studies, to say that, but, from our, our way of looking at things and using kinesiology, we could dive into that. But there's more life force energy there, which benefits all life, as we've said. And the EMF mitigation is harmonizing the EMFs that are coming onto the property, which are moving it, changing in some ways that we don't even understand the frequencies, so that it's positive for life instead of negative. And then we say it's consciousness raising rather than consciousness lowering, is the way we look at it.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of thoughts. You mentioned earlier, Gillian, or you inferred that people have to do something to benefit from FLFE, and maybe you didn't intend to say it that way, but certainly working consciously with the energy enhances the experience, but there's no conscious effort required. The exchange of money that you share with us is all you need to do. And so there's no effort on your part to receive the benefits of FLFE if you're a subscriber. And there are perhaps opportunities to use it in ways that we haven't fully discovered or fully appreciated. You mentioned that you were sensitive and you had a hard time adapting to FLFE when you first turned it on. About 1 or 2% of people have a challenge adapting to it. And oftentimes, if you turn that down or turn the FLFE service down on your control panel, that will give you time to adapt to the energy. Sometimes if you're on land that has had historical trauma, as the land is clearing and your body has been adjusting to that trauma for so long because you've lived on it, as the trauma of the land is changing and your LOC is going up, that can be another factor that can contribute to your adaptation challenge. So if you turn the LOC of the property down in your slider, that will give your beingness more time to adapt so that you have a better experience. And it sounds like you persisted with it and it's working. And the last point is that, truth is where you find it. That's what I believe. I'll speak for myself. And sometimes it's hard to know how to interpret all of these signals and signs from the universe. And we look for some type of verifiable evidence to see that a condition has changed. And we assume that the things that we've done had contributed to that condition. Now, this is getting into Gary's domain again, but from my experience, I try to make a reasonable assumption that I've contributed to change conditions when I've made a consistent effort. And sometimes things change for the positive for reasons that we may not understand with our linear minds. When we're praying for the land or praying for a condition to change, sometimes there's a higher power, some aspect of divinity that comes in that will relieve that condition for us. And that's, of course, for many of us on this call with our spiritual intention, that's part of how we see the world. And we also respect science a lot, because science is based in empirical evidence and the search for truth in its highest form. And so we're trying to have one foot in the nonlinear world of contributing to or requesting that conditions change, and having something happen that is outside of a linear understanding, and respecting procedures, process, protocols, the standards, the efficacy of science and integrous scientists such as Gary. Now, what I like about Gary is he's just weird, just barely weird enough to hang out with us. So and and he's a great scientist. So, you know, he's part of the family now, and so those are just kind of comments to add to your discussion. And you know, if you think something should be said, Gary, I'll turn it over to you.
I would love to insert one thing, and the idea that I'm just weird enough to be able to fit within the family and be of service to the family, and do so as a scientist as well as other aspects of my life is wonderful. But I have to just insert the following in my weirdness mode, but also my science mode, and that is, I think I heard that there was a significant synchronicity, meaningful synchronicity, which was attached to the receiving of yellow roses, and then the whole following of yellow roses. And why my ears perked up on that is because in the preparation, you know, the half hour before this webinar was to begin, I happened to notice, and it was confirmed, that Maria, who recently moved to Arizona, behind her had a bouquet of yellow roses. And we had a conversation about the yellow roses and the fact that you had yellow flowers behind you, Clayton. And then somebody brought up, it showed a yellow water bottle. So there was a lot of yellow, starting with yellow roses appearing. And then I made a little comment about yesterday. I'd been thinking about yellow and the meaning of yellow and connection with yellow and so on. And then I was surrounded by yellow cars at that moment. And so the idea that that this caller in this very important way would bring up yellow roses, it's at least amusing, and I think potentially profound.
Gillian, I guess I could mention as well that what we call the removal template, which works with geopathic stress on properties. Is this for a property subscription? And also looks to help or support that healing of trauma on the land and stuck souls by offering just more energy, for them to take the next step, and calling in familiar guides for them to help them. But sometimes it's a low energy situation that's occurring where there's not enough energy to take that next step, or they're just distracted by a sudden death and they still think they're alive, or they're attached to the land in some way that they don't want to leave it. So in our removal template, we try, or that part of FLFE, it's part of the clearing of the property and the supporting of trauma to clear. There's free will. Those beings can continue to stay on the land. But we're offering them, more energy and an avenue to go to the next stage in their evolution.
Well, notice Ashutosh has had his hand up for a while, and I see Maria's hand up.
So thank you, Gillian, for joining us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gillian.
Ashutosh? You just need to unmute yourself, I believe.
He's been waiting for a while. Oh, there he is.
Well, I think that I apologize. That must have been my mistake. So thank you.
Oh, you put your hand up by accident. Oh, good.
I have other times to ask you questions. So this is not the time. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
thanks,
thank you.
Ashutosh.
Yeah.
Did Maria, did you put your hand up by accident too?
No, mine was intentional. I just thought I would pop in and say hi and show my 24 yellow roses that I picked up, I don't know, less than an hour before the webinar, but also to share with the FLFE community. I bet they don't know this. There is the signature of Rose Energy in your service, which is, I mean, I don't know exactly how that works. I just know that it's part of the service, but I will tell you guys, in the years since I started FLFE, some of you may know I was a customer long before I worked at FLFE. And in my first 3 months as a customer, I had a very lovely salary increase. And when that happened, I decided I would now buy myself roses whenever I wanted. So I have 4 years worth of dozens and dozens of rose pictures. And usually it would be like, you know, on payday when I do the big grocery shop, I grab 2 dozen, you know, just, I mean, I really kind of overdid it. I don't just buy 1 dozen, but I get the cheap grocery store ones. And with FLFE, I can get them to last sometimes 3 weeks. So yeah, there are a lot of rose synchronicities, not only in the work that we do, but, you know, Jeff knows we have a lot of angel synchronicities with Maria and the roses that was mentioned in the previous caller. So all of that stuff is just very aligned with all of our work. And even when I was coming to meet Gary, I came up a couple months ago, I guess it was in maybe March or April. And on my drive here, it's like a 6-hour drive. There was a yellow truck behind me for like, I don't know, maybe 3 hours of the drive. And then I meet Gary in person and I get back to the hotel, and parked right next to me is this fancy yellow sports car, you know, in the very next parking spot next to my room. So it's just like all these yellow car synchronicities following me around as I was, you know, deciding on whether or not I wanted to move to Arizona. So now here I am, and yeah, I just thought I'd pop in and say hi. I don't usually show my face on the webinars, but I'm here in Arizona, and I'll get to be doing fun experiments with Gary in the Biophoton Lab and FLFE, and we will be designing some rose studies, hopefully, for the community, where like we've talked about having people buy a dozen roses and then giving half of them away to someone who doesn't have the service, see whose roses last longer. So we have some community inspired experiments that I think will be really fun. And I don't know if you guys know, but as well as having the pleasure of doing the marketing and the graphics for FLFE, I'm also on the research team. And I've been following Gary's work for like 20 years. So all of this is just dreamy, you know, fun. How do I get paid for this kind of, yeah, fun times.
Great, Maria. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
And the roses, yeah, what an incredible synchronicity with all Gillian's story.
Yeah, I'll leave it back to our customers.
Maria, may I ask a practical question?
Yes.
When does this webinar end?
Whenever you need to go, you can go.
Okay.
Gary.
Yes, whenever we're done answering questions,
Okay.
probably in the
All
next
right.
few minutes, I assume.
Okay. I mean, I love being a student with you, especially, I mean, this, and I love hearing people's comments and so on, but I have a busy day and I wanted to make sure that I could honor as much time as possible, but I'm sort of running out of time.
Yeah, and anytime you need to leave, Gary, would you like us to say goodbye?
Actually, if it's okay, because
Yes.
I would like to say goodbye, and I would like to just once again thank you and all of the forces there and here that you know, make all of this possible. And I should share something that I would like to say, that the on top of all the wonderful things that FLFE is doing with its goals, its missions, its philosophy, and its commitments, its creativity, and so on, to top it all off, you guys are fun. And I think people appreciate that. And I want to make sure that I've acknowledged that as well.
Well, I'm glad you like our corny jokes, Gary. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, people seeing us on a meeting together, they'd wonder if we're actually working or we're just cracking jokes all the time.
Well, everybody have a wonderful, safe, and FLFE enhanced weekend.
Thank you, Gary.
Take care. Bye, Gary.
Bye.
Well, it's one of the things that just continues to tickle me, Clayton, is our, at times intuitive connections to the other side. Is there's so much humor. It seems that humor is like universal throughout the entire multiverse.
Yes. Yeah, we're throttling it. We throttle ourselves back a lot and try to be civil on these webinars. Otherwise, we wouldn't get to talk about all these interesting things. I mean, we could spend half an hour talking about the synchronicities between roses and Maria. And if Lewis came on, it would be an hour talking about that, right? So it's interesting that Gillian brought that up.
Yeah. So Valerie's asking about using a pendulum on the prop to find the vortex on the property. Now, have you done that, Clayton?
Well, I use a version of that. I walk around the property when I've done it, and the inquiry I would use was, I mean, you can just draw your property. That's the traditional way of doing kinesiology, is to draw the property, at least the way that I was taught. You draw the property on a piece of paper, and I'd put my finger there, and I would do a kinesiology inquiry, and I would say the vortex, or where FLFE enters the property, it kind of comes down to an area and then it distributes, is located here, and the pendulum would go no, or yes. In the kinesiology inquiry, when you did it with somebody, yes is positive, no is negative, right? Muscle would go weak in the presence of untruth. Then you just go around your property with your finger on the map, holding it in mind, or you could walk around the property and do it. That's how I do it, Jeff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Probably other ways.
Yeah, I tend to use my pendulum, as a yes or no, like kinesiology. It's a truth or untruth, really. So yes, somebody's just commenting about dowsing rods. There may be a way to do it with dowsing rods. I really have never tried it. And possibly the pendulum will move in the vortex differently, but
Yes.
I haven't done a lot of work on that, but the way we're doing it is basically to make that inquiry, like as Clayton said.
Yes, we have used dowsing rods at the office. We had a shaman come in, and once we moved in, and he sort of evaluated how the energy flowed through the land on the property, even though it was it was on the surface, it was pretty high. It was like a type of energetic clearing, like a feng shui type of session, and they used dowsing rods amongst other things.
Interesting. We say we answer a few more and then wind it down. How are you doing, Clayton?
I'm good. It's not late at night like it usually is, so.
At least here, yes. And
Yes.
we may have seen some Australian customers online here. So here's an interesting one. Yeah, thank you, Gillian. Looks like Gillian's logging off.
Yeah.
So this person was saying, my question asks about the distinction between one, elevating the overall quality of consciousness compared to the effects of prescribing how consciousness ought to be focused according to preferred belief systems. The example of creating your own reality, New Age thinking. Energy appears to be similar to condition 1. Yeah, I'm not quite getting it, or condition 2 appears to be combined with 1. So I think it's the difference, the distinction between, as Clayton said, you can just be in the FLFE environment. There's nothing for you to do, and the overall level of consciousness rises versus focusing it yourself. And I think it comes down to consciousness and intention. I mean, we believe that in a high consciousness field, we see people's consciousness rises. Is it now 30 points? And
30 points in the first 90 days. Yeah.
Yeah. So each point is 10 times more energy present to create the world that you want to create, to create your reality, to manifest. So that being in that high conscious environment and being yourself higher consciousness, it just increases the strength of the intentions. And I think that's where, the combination of the question was sort of the effects of just the higher level versus using your intention. That I don't know if you ever get away from intention. It's just part of the, we're always intent. We always have some conscious thought, intentions and thoughts happening all the time, or unless we're meditating or sleeping. But even then, there's things happening. So I think it's a combination of the two that creates our evolution. And there is that belief, the belief is really how you see the world and how you focus or see change occurring. I'll let you go. Looks like you had something to say about that, Clayton.
I was just thinking of the distinctions between belief and intention. Typically, intention is very consciously held for a period of time. If you're thinking of manifesting, where belief could be it could include the current, we'll say, positive intention and the perhaps unconscious accumulated belief systems, thoughts, intentions, and other detritus that the mind tends to collect over time.
Yeah, thank you for that, Clayton.
Well, it's just, we're all about distinctions, right? Because we make these requests to divinity in the environment, which we call programs. If we're making a definition, we'll default consciously to the Oxford definition because it is the highest consciousness dictionary. And if that isn't high enough, or if it isn't as high as we would like it to be, it needs to be high enough to write the program, because it has to be 999 out of 1,000 or higher on the Hawkins map before we put it on. But sometimes we have to redefine a term to get it to be at that level. So when we start getting into intentions, and I'm talking to Jeff, I start calibrating the level of conscious of the intention, or the intention or belief system or definition unconsciously.
And as we rise in consciousness, whether just being in the environment or whatever work we're doing, we've got these belief systems. They might be unconscious, they might be conscious, that they may start to fall away if they don't serve us anymore.
Yes.
I think that's where things can get uncomfortable. Sometimes there's that, I don't know if it's dark night of the soul is one version of that step between one sort of level to the next, where the old has fallen away and it feels, more chaotic or not as connected. And then the next level, things come into a different way of organizing.
Positive transitions, as much as we like them, aren't always comfortable.
Well, why don't we close things down? We'd really appreciate, maybe I'll start, and really grateful for this event here today with the community and Gary's presence, and dedicating it to my son, Miles. So it's, there's a lot of power in this community that we have together. And I'm just totally buoyed up and grateful for you all and for your beautiful experiences, and you're sharing them with us. And so we look forward to seeing you next webinar, and we hope you're enjoying our podcast as well, Fields of Consciousness.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Blessings on Miles, and thank him for his contribution, his love of plants, and the search for truth that he was on. I'm just grateful for Maria and Aditi and Pauline today who come on this to help us manage all the conversations that are going on. And you know, some of you didn't get your questions answered, and please don't take that personally. We do have to end this webinar at some point. Although we could do a personal best, Jeff, we could maybe put aside 4 hours one day, and then maybe we could talk to everybody that wanted to chat. We'll see. Yeah, thank all of you who are subscribers, and even I welcome you. You know, those of you who aren't, but the subscribers allow us to continue to do this this work and continue the search for truth, as expressed through Gary's professional and academic and personal commitment to the truth. And it's a privilege to have Gary on the team, and he's got a fine mind, and that's just not his scientific ability. He's got a great sense of humor, and he's just a great person to share part of your life with. So I think that's all I have to say. Take care of you all.
Bye, everyone.